This is OFN NFL Preview for Week 9 as the NFL moves into the second half of the season and the trade deadline is behind us. So the teams will go to war for the rest of the season with the players they have on their teams, Mark. And was a little less of a big trade deadline day that maybe we were hoping for. There were a lot more, important trades that happened over the weeks preceding that. But I'm not really surprised because of the COVID year. I think a lot of teams are really not sure that this is the year to kind of go for it.
I agree. The trading deadline came and went, and if you hadn't have told me that there was a trading deadline, I would not even been aware of it.
Yeah.
It was really basically that quiet, and that quiet for a lot of those reasons you mentioned, because of the COVID situation, the uncertainty about the players' contracts, whether or not they're healthy enough to play, if some of the players that were involved had COVID in the past, what that means. So it ended up being a real precarious type situation, and it came and it went, and as far as we're concerned, it never happened.
All right. Well, let's talk about this Thursday night football game to get things started. The Packers were hoping that the championship game last year never happened. This is a rematch. Matter of fact, the Packers lost both games to the Niners last year by a 74-28 margin. But this is a completely different San Francisco team. And the Packers are pretty much the same, which is not a good thing because they still can't stop the run. I mean, their run defense, which was the biggest issue last year, they did a couple of things to try to improve upon it, but they just haven't done enough. And again, it just shows you, all right, you want to go out and spend a first-round draft pick on a quarterback when you have Aaron Rodgers and a second pick on a running back when you have Aaron Jones, and then you don't have wide receivers, and you still have a bad run defense. So it's amazing that the Packers are still as successful as they are, but it shows you what a Hall of Fame quarterback can do to mask a lot of the problems that this team has. But again, the bottom line is they're playing a Niner team that is just banged up. We thought they were going to get back to maybe being a playoff team, and now all of a sudden Jimmy G's out and the running backs keep getting hurt. It's just the injuries just keep piling up for San Francisco, which is why the Packers are a 6-point road favorite, even though it's not a true home game for San Francisco, if you know what I mean. Still, it's a lot of points for Green Bay to be giving San Francisco, considering the domination the Niners gave upon them last year.
Well, here we are, Greg. It's a Wednesday when we do this show in San Francisco. The 49ers training camp was shut down for COVID. So, aside from the injuries, there's the COVID situation,
right,
which is, harrowing if you're in the San Francisco organization. So, what kind of frame of mind will they be going into this football game? That remains to be seen. But we handicap the games for what they are. And yes, this is revenge for Green Bay from being taken out twice last year by the 49ers. But I want to call out one point about all that. And what it is this. Green Bay was a 7.5-point, take a look at this, dog on this field last year. Okay. Yep. Now they're a 6-point favorite on this field this year. Okay. That's a pretty healthy line swing. Okay. Yep. And a pretty healthy line swing against a team that is still involved in the playoff chase. So that in itself points me to San Francisco in this football game for openers, at least. Then you've got Aaron Rodgers in one of the worst roles in his career in the month of November, where I told you he does not shine in November. It seems to be
saw that last week.
Yeah, it seems to be his Napoleon month, if you will. And in November, when he's away in non-division games, he's just 2-13 straight up and 3-11-1 to the spread. So, you put all these things together here, and suddenly a 6-point San Francisco home dog looks pretty attractive, just hoping that the football players that line up for San Francisco are capable of carrying out their orders.
Yeah, Kyle Shanahan is 7-1 against the spread as a dog following a straight-up division loss. Of course, the Niners coming off the loss to Seattle. Unfortunately, a big negative for San Francisco, 6-23. Now, this is games 9 through 12, all right? So for the Niners, we're in that third stage of games 9 through 12. They're just 6-23 against the spread at home versus opponents seeking revenge. This is the third road game in the last 4 for the Packers. They've lost 2 out of the last 3, and they just got beat up by Minnesota. The Vikings hadn't been doing anything good lately, and then Dalvin Cook comes back, and it just shows you that. And I said this on one of my other shows this week. Dalvin Cook has become the number 1 running back in the NFL for importance on any team. That includes Christian McCaffrey in Carolina. Even when he comes back, which he will be back soon, he is it's an amazing transformation of what they can do to limit Kirk Cousins being the man, having to rely on Kirk Cousins. He is this clear MVP of the team, and he beat up on the Packers last week, and now it's going to be up to San Francisco and running backs like JaMychal Hasty to see if they can continue that ugly Green Bay Packer run defense trend.
Yeah, he is clearly the MVP of the team, provided he's healthy. When he's not, obviously, it all falls on Kirk Cousins, who can't seem to handle the workload.
Nope.
So that is a key, obviously, for that football team here. And we talked about San Francisco, and aside from the COVID part of the football game, you know what? When you go into a CVS store and they print out a receipt and they give you this long list of receipt with all these things you have to read, okay?
Yeah.
Well, that's like reading the San Francisco 49er injury report every week.
Oh, yeah.
Okay? You know, you need extra time to take it all in. And that's exactly what the case is for San Francisco these days. So, you know, a couple of those injuries along with the COVID, it makes it for a tepid situation here backing the Niners. But I'm all about value, and I'm going to go harken back to that point that they were, in this game, 7.5-point dogs last year, and now might be laying 7 points come Thursday night because of all these moves and everything going on here. So I'm going to play the value in the football game and look at San Francisco.
Yeah, matter of fact, we talked about at the beginning of the season that because of the lack of preparation time, that we're going to probably have more injuries this year than normal. And we had a very quiet first week. And then everything just since week 2 has just been piling up on teams, including San Francisco. All right, now let's get to one of the top games of the week. And for the second straight week, the Baltimore Ravens are involved in the game of the week. They're taking on Indianapolis. This time they go on the road. And we've talked about this before. You know, I think that even though there would be some people that will look at the loss for Baltimore against Pittsburgh, and they're trailing the Steelers now by a couple of games, and looks like they're going to have to do it the wild card way. That's a bad break for Baltimore. But as we have talked about before, I don't think, and I think you agree, we don't think it's a bad break for Baltimore, because I trust Baltimore more when they're on the road. They're the dog. There's no pressure on, and now on Lamar Jackson, because we've already seen when there is pressure on Lamar Jackson in home games, he just doesn't get it done. So if I'm a Raven fan, I'd much rather Lamar Jackson on the road. Maybe they're counting him out. You can't count on Harbaugh as a dog on the road in big games. Now, they're not the dog in this one. I'm just thinking later on down playoff time. But still, I'm kind of leaning towards the Colts in this one because there are some key injuries now for the Ravens. Not only does Ronnie Stanley get injured and he's out for the year, but Judon and Queen are dealing with COVID, so they're out. That's only their best pass rusher and, you know, one of the more top young players they have in Queen, their top draft pick. We know what the Ravens do on the road. They're a successful spread team on the road with Lamar Jackson, but they've also dropped 4 straight covers after they've taken on the Pittsburgh Steelers.
Yeah, it's been a poor performance by the Ravens after hooking horns with the Steelers. As you mentioned, 4 straight losses. And that ties into a real good theory of mine that comes out of my database, and it's called the post-Pittsburgh performance. And basically what it amounts to is, in the Mike Tomlin era, any NFL football team that finds themselves road favorite in a division game after playing Mike Tomlin's Pittsburgh Steelers, those teams are 42-68 against the spread.
Wow.
That's a pretty nasty number. Okay,
that's a lot of games too.
Yes, it is. And what it basically
judge a team. Yeah.
Yes. And what it tells us is that teams get beat up physically playing Pittsburgh, and the next game, if they're in this situation, they're really not 100% ready to go out and perform like they're capable of doing. Now, you talked about the Colts, who have won the money 8 straight times in a row in the series, and I have a newsletter called the Midweek Alert. It's our statistical newsletter. It's like our daily reaching form of football newsletters, because what we do is we list all the past performances of the season side by side, so you can compare them just like you're comparing racehorses in previous races. And if you take a look at in our Midweek Alert newsletter, I call Frank Reich the most underrated coach in the National Football League, Frank Reich from Indianapolis. He's done a great job since he's taken over the program, and he had a lot to do after Andrew Luck throughout that sudden retirement. The team didn't fall apart at the threads. They're still in contention. They're playing some really, really good football here. I'm going to go with the Colts in this football game here. I think they're a much better, well-balanced football team. We get what we see with the Colts each week. We don't know what we're going to get from the Ravens each week, because Lamar Jackson is like the stock market. He's up and down. You never know which Lamar Jackson you're going to see. I'll couple that with our past Pittsburgh performance angle and play on the Colts in this football game.
Yeah, and let's also keep in mind that the Colts defense, when Darius Leonard is healthy, just makes this defense one of the top units in the league. There's just no question. I mean, without him, they're top 10, top 12. With him, top 2 or 3. And we saw that again last week. You put him out there. You got Houston. You got Buckner. Waynes is having a renaissance in the secondary. They have talented play. They had two guys, 2 sacks each in the game last week. They had a pick 6. And then they go up against Jackson this week, who has just been awful against winning teams over the last 3 starts. And I'm assuming that is the Chief loss, the Pittsburgh loss, and the playoff loss. He hasn't looked good at all. Now, the only thing is all those losses have been at home. So maybe the road, which has been kind to Lamar Jackson, 12-2 on the road, and that's pretty successful, no question about it, over his career. But I don't know. I agree with you. I think maybe the Colts, knowing that this is a big barometer game for them and a tough schedule for the Colts as well, because they got to play Tennessee on the road on Thursday night next week. Then they host Green Bay, and then they host Tennessee again. So that's a tough 4-game stretch coming up for the Colts. So they mean business for sure. Baltimore, they know they're going to the playoffs. So I think this is also a much more important game for the Colts. Plus, Phillip Rivers has had his best back-to-back games of the season.
I agree 100% with all of everything you said. You mentioned Baltimore, Lamar Jackson, 12-2 on the road. I'll see that now up you. The Colts 11-3 as a non-division home dog the last 14 games. So we can play poker back and forth, with numbers inside this football game. But I think what you said is the perfect case in point here, that Lamar Jackson simply beats bad teams and does not perform well against good teams. And I think that's the case of what we're going to see here this week. We saw it last week, and I think it holds true again on Sunday.
All right, now we have Seattle and Buffalo. Seattle, another East Coast time zone game, which they've had a lot of success at over the years, 23-9 straight up in Eastern time zone games under Russell Wilson, including 8-0 since last season. They beat Atlanta and Miami this season. This is a step up in competition, though, taking up Buffalo, even though there's no crowd, but the weather could come into play. Seattle deals with weather as well. But look, Seattle, and this is a good segue into the trend of the week after last week, or the stat of the week, because I had to get a laugh when I was going over every week. I do my show, my kind of my NFL weekend wrap show with Ryan Dunleavy, the Post, and I always got to go over the games and the stats, and I'm looking through the information and I'm writing down everything, and I always write down besides the score, I always write down total yards. And after I'm going through some of these games, I'm going, this is getting interesting, because I feel like every time I'm writing down who's winning total yards, those teams are losing. That's not normal. And when I got to Seattle and it said 350 Seattle to 351 San Francisco, I had to laugh, because I know how much that you've talked about Seattle's defense, and they're getting outgained every week. And sure enough, even though it's only by 1 yard and they won again, they got outgained by a yard. So I thought that was kind of funny. But what do you think about that? I mean, that was really I don't know if that's something that has happened much this year, but not only did the dog win 7 of the 14 games outright last week, but the teams who won the total yards lost 9 of 14 games.
Yeah, I play with that a lot, Greg, and that was the first thing I noticed when I was logging my stats about what I call all these inside-out games and results we saw on Sunday in the NFL. And throughout the course of the season, Seattle's been involved in the majority of those games. The worst defense in the league, they've only out-yarded 2 teams this season, yet they come in here as the number 1 seed in the NFC.
Yep.
Number 1, 2, or 3. I may not be true about the number 1 anymore. But the fact is, Seattle is looked upon as being perhaps the team to beat in the NFC these days. So they're doing it again with smoke and mirrors coming into this football game. Buffalo got by New England last week, and not real pretty. We have to admit that, but we weren't expecting a big Buffalo win, just because of history and the fact that they've really, really struggled in the past. They were 5-35 against the Patriots the previous 40 games. So to look for a large margin victory would have been a little bit of a surprise, to say the least. But I will say this, that now that they're 6-2, Buffalo has been 6-2 11 times in their franchise history to start a season, and they've never missed the playoffs in any of those years.
Oh, yeah. It's time for the Bills to win the AFC East again.
There we go. There we go. And it most likely will happen with New England being in this downturn type of situation this football season here. So you've got Buffalo here, a team that feels like they're justified to be a division leader, playing Seattle, who is a division leader. So this is got all the makeup of a playoff game, a playoff atmosphere type football game here. But if you look at Buffalo, and the one thing that they've done well in the past is they've really performed good against the NFC West. They're 23-9-1 against the spread, going all the way back to 1990, and 11-1 inside those numbers when they have a win percentage of .570 or better. I'm going to stay with Buffalo in this game, and I know that Seattle's fared well on the East Coast. I think that's an atypical stat. I think sooner or later it goes back the other way. I think it starts Sunday here, like the Bills over the Seahawks.
Yeah, Buffalo beat the Rams earlier this year. They're at Arizona next week. So that'll be the third team that they play from the West this year. But look, a couple of things here, and that is that Buffalo, we've talked about this, that they haven't played particularly good football lately. But they were able to get the win against the Jets in ugly fashion. They made a couple big plays when they needed to last week to beat the Patriots. They got the strip on Cam Newton at the end. And that's all that matters. You know, you got to win games like that to prove that you're a young team like the Bills are that are learning how to win big games when they're not playing their best football. The proof is they haven't covered a game in 4. They're 0 for 4 against the spread the last 4. So that tells you right there they're not playing their best football. But maybe the win over their arch nemesis is what they need confidence-wise to start playing good football again. And maybe that could happen, no question, because you are still, like you said, they're getting a team from the West Coast. It's sooner or later. You just can't keep winning those games. It's just you can still have a winning record like Seattle has, but you know it doesn't mean you're going to win them all. So I could definitely see where you're coming up with that. Seattle, interesting. We talked about how Baltimore does not respond after playing Pittsburgh. Seattle responds after playing San Francisco. They've covered 5 straight after a 49er game. But there's games 5 through 8. There are some big trends that work against Seattle. And again, you can find those 5 through 8 games in the quarterly reports right here in Playbook Magazine, right there. Games 5 through 8. And I've got 3 of them. Seattle, 2-13, off a straight up against the spread division win. Seattle, 2-13 as a winning team versus a winning team off a division game. And Seattle, 2-14 off a double-digit straight-up ATS win versus a winning team. 2-13, 2-13, 2-14. That's a lot of ugly.
Well, it tells you that Seattle really tends to struggle in the second quarter of a football season. When we can find stats like that and an abundance of good stats like that, it also tells you there were a bunch of mediocre stats that weren't all that well for Seattle in that particular situation. So I think, like you mentioned, the time of the year, the opponent, the schedule situation, the dynamics, I think Seattle gets exposed on Sunday.
Jamal Adams might return. That would be a big boost for their defense because they need him. Dunlap should be ready to go too. Of course, they acquired him, and Bobby Wagner proved that he's still around. He's still a really good linebacker. He had a
Yes, he is.
huge game last week for the Seattle Seahawks. So they can get Jamal Adams back. They can get Dunlap into that defense. These are the things that Seattle needs to be a better defense than what they've shown so far this season. Okay. And by the way, Seattle has division opponents the next 2 games. They're at the Rams next week, and then they host Arizona. Let's talk about Chicago and Tennessee. And Tennessee is a 5.5-point favorite in this one. And Chicago was actually one of my 2 upsets last week. I hit on Miami and almost hit on Chicago. So that was a tough one because when Drew Brees had the ball to start the overtime and the Bears stopped them, the Bears had to take advantage of that opportunity, and they couldn't do it. And once they had to punt back to Drew Brees, that wasn't a good thing, and it worked against them. And I think that loss, I kind of think that that's going to do it for the Bears because they're now behind New Orleans. They're behind Tampa, and if Tampa wins the division, that's 2 teams they got to chase, 1 team in the wild card. That means there's only room for 2 more wild cards. You've got in the West, they got the Rams you have to contend with as a wild card. You got Arizona you have to contend with as a wild card. So it's just looking like time is running out for the Bears. But, they have a chance this week because they've been a good team at this role this year. They've won 4 out of 7 as a dog, covered 5 out of 7. They're 3-1 on the road this year as a dog. And Tennessee, and we talked about this last week, we both liked the Bengals in the spot against Tennessee, and it sure looked good. We sure looked good in that one. Tennessee has dropped 2 straight. They have dropped 11 straight covers before they play on Thursday Night Football. And they've dropped 8 straight covers as a non-division home favorite of 4 or more points. So there are some trends that definitely go against Tennessee again, including, as we talked about last week, which is why we like Cincinnati, that even when Tennessee wins football games, they don't win by very much, and they don't do a very good job of covering those games. So I think there's a good spot for the Bears that even if they don't win, maybe they have another 3-point loss.
Well, the Bears obviously have a tendency to lull you to sleep, okay, because their offense is flat out boring. Last week was the first time they cracked the 300-yard plateau behind Nick Foles. They're averaging just 274 yards a game in his 5 starts this football season here. So I don't think Tennessee's losing sleep at night worrying about the Chicago attack that they're going to be playing here on Sunday.
Wouldn't this worry you about Eric Bieniemy? Because Nagy was supposed to be even a little bit more of an offensive genius type of disciple for Reed than Bieniemy. And even though we know Foles and Trubisky aren't all that cracked up to be, Foles is a Super Bowl winning quarterback. And you look at the skill position players that the Bears have, and they're okay. They're not bad. They're not great, but they're okay. So even though the offensive line isn't all that good, shouldn't they be a little bit less boring?
Well, you would think they should be, but I think the truth of the matter is Nick Foles is a very serviceable quarterback. I don't think he's a star by any means, and I think he was cast in that role when he came off the bench and rallied and took Philadelphia to a Super Bowl. That automatically, elevated his status, where he is. But I think even before all that, he was just mediocre at best, and he's being exposed for who Nick Foles is. He doesn't really take control of a football team offensively. He just kind of tries not to let them lose, and that kind of fits the MO of the Chicago Bears. So I'm with you as far as the Bieniemy thing goes here. It's like, who are you going to blame here? The coach or the quarterback, or the playbook?
Yeah, it's not like Bieniemy's going to take Patrick Mahomes with him.
No, he's not. Obviously, so that I wouldn't be surprised at all if Chicago does not win this game to see Mitchell Trubisky back behind center for the Bears next week as they enter into the second half of that football season here.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah.
So this is a big game for Nick Foles in that sense. And then you've got Nashville. They're 0-8 to the spread as non-division home favorites of 4 or more points.
Yep.
So they've had a tendency to crack in situations like this as well. So I'm with you. I'm going to lean to the Bears in this football game. Again, using that same analogy that they bore their opponent to death, more or less make them play down to their level and take their chance at the end of a football game to see in one last push down the field if they can't steal a win some way, somehow. Didn't happen last week when they lost in overtime to New Orleans, but it nearly did. But I'll be taking the points with the Bears in this game.
Yeah, Tennessee is 1-4-1 against the spread as a favorite this year. 1-4-1. The win was an overtime win. So, if they kick a field goal in overtime, they don't cover. So that was an overtime win. And the tie was week 1, and that was a 2-point win against Denver. We remember that game, that crazy game where Gostkowski missed every field goal except the last one.
Right.
So
kind of
Tennessee
weird.
just not a very comfortable team as a favorite this year.
No, and it's kind of where they succeeded last year, as they kind of snuck up on teams, if you will, after Ryan Tannehill took over the football program. Not a lot was expected, but they delivered the goods. Between Tannehill not costing him games and Derrick Henry becoming a runaway freight train, as he was last year, they met with all that success. Now, there's a little bit more game film on Tannehill, and I don't know if Tannehill isn't much different than Nick Foles in that he's a serviceable quarterback. I don't think he's ever going to take a team to a Super Bowl.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe a little bit more dynamic than Foles in that sense, but if they make it to the playoffs again this year, maybe we'll give them a couple more kudos. But I'm not losing sleep over having to play against Ryan Tannehill these days.
Keep in mind, too, Tennessee 0-2 without Taylor Lewan. He's been out the last couple of weeks. They did make a good trade. It looked like very surprised that the Chargers gave up on Desmond King, a young cornerback, a good young corner. You would have thought that those are the types of players the Chargers would want to keep around. They're in a rebuilding mode. I don't understand why you give away a kid like that for a 6th-round draft pick. I don't get it. But then again, I haven't really gotten what the Chargers organization has been doing for years now.
Well, I think that was more than anything had to do with the fact that he's going to be a free agent next year. And they may have felt that he wasn't going to be around for them, so they at least got something for him right now, as opposed to getting nothing next football season. And you don't know what he was like in the locker room. Who knows?
Sure, that's true.
But it was surprising on the surface. I agree with you. He's talented enough to started with the Chargers and all of a sudden traded for a 6th-round pick. It tells you there's something more going on there.
Yeah, that's a tricky situation when you're a rebuilding team and if you have some salary cap issues. And I get it. You got Bosa, you have Ingram, you have Keenan Allen, and you couldn't afford really Melvin Gordon. You wouldn't want to give him a lot of money in the situation that what he was asking for. And it's like, yeah, but your team isn't very good. So at some point you have to do a better job with your salary cap. And it's very tough. You can't. Sometimes you just can't have 2 superstars like Ingram and Bosa making the same amount of money. It's just not fiscally, possible, apparently.
Let me ask you this question. In the dreadful way last week in which the Chargers lost that football game on the pass interference penalty in the end zone, might that not have been on him? I don't know. They could have said, that's it. I mean, you cost us a football game. I don't know whether he
on
was.
King?
Yes.
Oh, okay. Yeah,
I don't
interesting.
know.
Yeah. And by the way, Bosa had a concussion early in the 4th quarter of that game. And definitely that was an edge for Denver not having to deal with him. Ingram has been kind of quiet, to tell you the truth, the last couple of years. He was more of the star a couple of years ago. I don't really hear about him much anymore. I'm not saying he doesn't still play well, but for the amount of money that they're paying him, maybe the Chargers might be better off trying to figure out a way to trade Ingram if they can. Like I said, if you're having cap issues where you have to trade a King, if that's the reason, I don't know. I think I'd rather. It's like the Cowboys. Maybe they should be trading one of those wide receivers. What do you need 3 really good wide receivers for when you can't play defense?
Or you have an offensive line that can't keep the quarterback upright either. So a lot of issues going on with the Dallas Cowboys these days. But yeah. I'm with you. Sometimes you have to use where your strength is and maybe go into the strength a little bit to strengthen up where your weaknesses are. So, that might not have been a bad strategy for Dallas.
All right, Miami and Arizona and the Dolphins. Boy, what a crazy win for the Dolphins last week. It was interesting because I was going over the stats with Ryan, and I pointed out that there were only 3 sacks in the game last week. All 3 sacks resulted in turnovers. I mean, that was just crazy. And Tua wasn't very good, and yet they were still able to win the game because of the defense making huge plays and Jakeem Grant on a punt return touchdown. And that's great. The the defense has been fantastic the last few games, and they're making plays. And, Flores is a defensive guy. Uh, that is all good. But Tua has got to step it up because you cannot rely on your defense to do that every week. And now you're taking on an Arizona team that's red hot. Matter of fact, both teams have won 3 straight up and against the spread. Miami by a 95-34 margin. Arizona by a 105-54 margin. And as we have talked about this before, Cliff Kingsbury is 7-1 against the spread versus winning teams. You have to give him a lot of credit for that. Miami's got to go out west to take on Arizona. They did a good job beating the Niners a few weeks ago. I just think it's going to catch up to Miami. I like 5 points. Yeah, maybe it's a little high, but I'm not going to worry about it too much. Once again, if you take a look at the win and you cover scenario, it still favors teams where if you win, you're going to cover. And that record is 92-24-3. So I'm going to go ahead and take Arizona over Miami this week.
Well, I think the key stat in this football game is inside that win by Miami last week, they were out-yarded 326 yards.
Oh, and they won by double digits.
And they won by double digits. That's an anomaly, okay? You might not find that. You could take one hand and find that in the history of the National Football League. And it happened last week. And it happened last week with a rookie quarterback making his debut. Now he's going to go on the road and take on a celebrated first-round pick of the draft in Kyler Murray, okay, who's playing his best football of the season right now. In his last 4 games, his quarterback rating is 104.5 average in his last 4 football games. He's playing as well as he has in his career. He's also 10-5 in his career against the spread in non-division football games. Then you couple Arizona being rested here, playing their best ball of the season, and when they are playing with rest in the regular season against an opponent that's coming off a win of more than 3 points, they're a perfect 8-0 to the spread. I think Miami gets exposed in this football game here, and then they're going to have to wonder whether or not they went too early to the well with Tua. That's next week's story. I think going into this week, Arizona is the right side of this football game.
By the way, Myles Gaskin's out for the Dolphins, and I know he's not a star running back, but he has been clearly the best running back for the Dolphins this season. I guess Breida, maybe he becomes the number 1 running back this week. So that means Tua is going to have to be relied on a little bit more. And after what we saw last week, I'm not sure that's the way to go. But yeah, I think we agree Arizona would be a good play this week as a 5-point favorite. All right, now the final of the top 5 games this week is Denver and Atlanta. A couple of teams that this isn't the big game or anything like that. But this is a game that I like, and I think reading some of the material from your newsletter and the guide this week that I think you're edging the same way with Denver. The Broncos are a 3.5-point dog here. And I also like the fact that Denver's about a plus 170 on the money line because I might even go in that direction. They're 2-1 straight up, 3-0 against the spread as a road dog this year. Vic Fangio has covered all 6 of his games this year when he's off of his career, when he's off a division game. And that includes what happened last week because he played the Chiefs the week before, came off a division game, won the game. So again, he's 6-0 in that kind of spot. But more importantly, Atlanta, they haven't been very good in this spot. They're 0-4 straight up and against the spread as a home favorite this year. And there's a few other trends that go against the Falcons as well. I like the Denver Broncos because even before I was looking at the trends, because I had already sensed these types of trends before. So I kind of knew what I was already getting involved with. And I would hope if you're a Drew Lock and Denver fan that what you saw last week in the second half is him finally getting his confidence going again.
Well, it was certainly, if you can't get it going after last week, he never will. That was really, really a well executed drive that he executed down the stretch to win the game with no time left on the clock with an extra play, really. But kudos to them. They got the job done, and now they move on to Atlanta here. So the question becomes, which Atlanta football team are they going to play here? Last year, the parallel that we drew in our newsletter is that Atlanta started 1-7 last football season and covered the spread only one time in those 8 games as well. Then they really kicked it in gear. Now, since they fired Dan Quinn and went to Raheem Morris, they've outyarded all 3 opponents that they played, which could well be an indicator that Atlanta could well be back on that path that they were on last year when they started so
Yeah,
dismal.
maybe.
Yeah, they could be, and this will I think be the real true barometer. We're going to find out because if they cruise past Denver here, you might want to put Atlanta on your watch list here going out because they're going to be probably playing some pretty good football with confidence. But until it happens, I can only go on what I have in front of me and on my database. The last 15 times that Atlanta has been at home in a non-conference game playing a team from the AFC, they are 2-13 against the spread. I'm not going to be in a hurry to lay points with Atlanta in the football game because Denver's feeling pretty good about what happened last week. So that being the case, I'll take the Denver Broncos plus the points and see where Atlanta falls moving forward from this game. Moving on.
Also, quarterly, games 9 through 12, Atlanta 2-12 against the spread as a losing team at home versus a non-division opponent. Denver will take on Las Vegas next week. If they win this game, they're a 500 team.
Yeah, that's pretty nice.
Yeah.
Vic Fangio will feel probably pretty good about that, especially in knowing that he's stuck with Drew Lock and he's not embarrassing him at all. So this is a big, big game for Denver as well.
Okay, Sunday Night Football, that's the big one, New Orleans and Tampa. New Orleans, of course, played and beat Tampa to start the season. The Bucks are now a 5.5-point favorite at home this time around. You do have to wonder whether the Bucks were already looking ahead to this game because they sure didn't look good on Monday night against the Giants. But New Orleans, they're in a spot where the trends favor them and Sean Payton. So they have some good trends working in their direction, including in beating Tampa Bay now, a 4th straight time, straight up and against the spread. They're 5-1 against the spread as a road dog in their last 6, and they've covered 9 straight as division dogs of 3 or more points. And as I said, they also have a couple of other big trends working their way, including Sean Payton. And I know that was a big trend, one of the trends of the week in the newsletter.
Well, you've got a lot of good trends here in this football game here, and a lot of them circle around Sean Payton and how well he does in this particular role. We call that out in what we call our trivia teaser, and every week we'll put something in a trivia teaser. It's about a coach. And in good roles like that. And what the trivia teaser surrounding Sean Payton in this football game is that he's 19-2-1 to the spread as a dog against a 500 or better opponent when he's taking more than 3 points.
That's pretty good, 19-2-1.
That's a pretty nice trend here for Sean Payton coming into the football game. And you've also got in this contest, coming into the contest here as well, I think a dissettling fact for the Tampa Bay Bucks in that Antonio Brown will be in uniform.
Yep.
And I cannot believe for the life of me that they would have accepted him as a football player on this team. Why would you want to break up the continuity that you had in bringing an alleged rape artist onto the team who's done nothing but steal headlines from every team that he's been with because he's a headline hog himself? And now it's said that Tom Brady wanted him so bad that he's got Antonio Brown moving in and living with him.
I don't get it. Yep.
I don't get it either. Trying to keep him on the straight and narrow for whatever reason it happens to be. But I'm going to be with Sean Payton and Drew Brees in this football game here. I realize that they beat them earlier this football season here, but this is a nice spot here for the Saints. Sean Payton, 10-3 to the spread, wins a division dog in games that are decided by 1 score or less. And I can't see this being a blowout to either side of this football game here. I'm going to grab New Orleans plus the points.
Yeah, the thing that I would, it's interesting because you got that major trend against the spread working for Peyton, and this might be one of those games where I try to figure out a way to get both the points, but also maybe throw in a parlay with the money line, maybe as like a final parlay where you can get 2-1 with the Saints in this one, and it's not very often you can get 2-1 on the Saints. So you might as well take advantage of it when it's around.
Well, you're doing it because it's Tom Brady and the Tampa Bay Bucks, and they're on a roll right now. And they've got the revenge factor in their favor. So, everybody could talk all those points, and they could talk it up to the point where New Orleans is indeed 2-1 on the money line. But, if you had to look at Drew Brees in his career anytime he was a 2-1 or better money line proposition play, you probably have some pretty good money in the bank right now.
Probably.
Yes, you probably do. And there's no sense in making withdrawal right now or stopping deposit slips. So I'd say continue on with Drew Brees, and I'm with you. I'd even play him on a money line.
And Monday night, the Patriots and the Jets. Hopefully, you'll get a game as good as the Giants and Tampa, because the two New York teams getting back-to-back Monday night games, that's not good this season. Patriots have lost 4 straight. First time they're a road favorite this year, if you can believe that. They've won 8 straight versus the Jets. And the only thing I could say with the Jets is that this is only going to be competitive if Crowder plays at least. Because I'll tell you what, the kid Mims is going to be a good receiver for them down the road. If they can get Crowder in there with Mims, I don't know if Perryman's going to play. Would be nice as a Jet fan to see Perryman, Mims, Crowder all playing at the same time for the first time this season. I think if Patriots cover this game, I think it'll be a late cover because the Patriots just haven't played very good football lately at all. I think if you're a Patriot fan, though, you're happy about the way they ended the game, even though it was by a strip and you lost, because the last couple of drives against the Bills, they actually looked as good as they've looked in weeks offensively, both Cam Newton throwing and running the ball. It's just that they came up short with the turnover. So if they can pick up where they left off with those last 2 drives last week, they shouldn't have much of a problem beating the Jets on Monday.
Is it just me? Let me ask you this, but does Cam Newton appear like he's lost about 25 pounds? I mean, he doesn't look anything in the stature like he did in his playing days with Carolina. And I know he went on a fitness regimen, but it sounds like he might have went a little bit too far, looking almost frail to a point. But that's just an observation. He's not playing his best football. He wasn't playing good football at the time when he went on the disabled list and wasn't starting for Carolina. So he may not be as good a quarterback as he thought he was, and his best days could well be in the rearview mirror. They have 15 turnovers this year due to the New England Patriots. That's more than they had the entire season last year. So Cam Newton's got to be a big part of that, obviously, to take blame for something like that. But you look at the other side of the coin, and you don't see a lot there. The New York Jets, 0-8 for the first time since 1996. They've only won the spread 1 time this year. They've been out-yarded soundly in every one of their 8 games. I'm going to look at New England in this football game here. They've dominated division opponents in Monday night games, 6-1 straight up, 5-1-1 to the spread the last 7 contests like that. And I just don't see the New York Jets stepping up against anybody at this stage of the football season here. They're not going to be letting Adam Gase go. He's not going to do any good. And I think they're clearly in this right now for Trevor Lawrence. And why step up and play a good football game and blow your chance at Trevor Lawrence, although Trevor Lawrence has said that he maybe will stay home or go back to Clemson if indeed the Jets end up with that pick. But I think even if they wanted to, the Jets are having a very, very difficult time putting a good game or playing a good game together. The Giants showed they're capable of playing a decent football game. The Jets haven't yet this year. And I'm not going to wake a sleeping giant or lack of a sleeping giant with the Jets here. I'll play New England in a football game.
All right, Mark. So playbook.com, you got the coffee club emails that come out every day. You also, of course, have the weekly newsletter that comes out, I believe, on Wednesdays, early on Wednesdays. So it gives you more than enough time to research all the games for college and pro football. But you want everybody to go to playbook.com, and that's where they could find out how to accumulate all this wealth of knowledge.
It's all available, like you said, Greg, at playbook.com. We also publish the nation's only totals tip sheet. The NFL Totals Chip Sheet. You can check that out also when you're online at playbook.com.
Thanks, Mark. We'll see you next week for Week 10.
Have a great week, Greg. Enjoy the games.